Hello and welcome to another episode of the Expanse Abridged Podcast series. Today we've got chapter 19 of Leviathan Wakes, the first book in the series, and we've got Holden. Big boy Holden is our guy for the day. Last we saw Holden, he'd escaped the Donager, they'd got their new sexy ship, the Rocinante, and they were kind of chilling out in that. And then Frederick Johnson of OPA affiliation and of a big ass space shuttle or spaceship was like, boys, come hang out, I can sort you out. And they went there. And this chapter, we follow them immediately from that, and they've just arrived and they've met Fred Johnson. The chapter opens with them meeting him. Fred is a big boy. He's got a warm and open smile, hand outstretched, and he meets them, and there's no guns or anything like that. He's just chilling out, and Holden starts laughing because this is the first time in over a month that he's gotten off a ship without it blowing up behind him, which is big because obviously Holden's journey so far has been the Canterbury getting blown up, then there's the little shuttle they're on, the Donager, and various things. So our boy's got some PTSD, he's got some things to work out, so now he's just happy to chill out. And Fred explains the reason it's so safe on the station they're at, which I've completely forgotten the name of all of a sudden. It's Tycho Station, isn't it? Yeah, Tycho. It's a great name for a kid, I think. But the reason it is so safe is because they make campaign contributions to Earth and Mars politicians in amounts that would make a Hilton blush. So, yeah, there's still Hiltons going about in those days, in the future, which is quite nice. And they kind of journey through the spaceship, and they join in the middle where it's not spinning, because there's these big spinning things to gravity. And as they go to the outside, as they go to the spinning part, obviously gravity kicks in, and everyone kind of gets thrown about a bit, and Fred laughs at them because he forgot to warn them. And they get onto the spaceship, which is like this big brand new, well, it's meant to be the really high-tech thing, and Holden says he wouldn't have been surprised to find that they were pumping new space station scent into the air. And the entire thing is covered in like a faux wood, because even though these guys are as wealthy as they are, they cannot afford real wood. And Holden says he reckons he's the only person that's ever seen like real wooden furniture. And Amos, who grew up in Baltimore in the US, there hadn't been a tree there for more than a century. And Fred's kind of giving them a tour. He's taken to the room they've arranged for them, and he's saying he's the tour about the ship. He's like, Malthus Tycho was the guy that built it. His grandson now runs the company. I do wonder if Malthus is like a reference to Malthusian economics. Which is like the thing where it's like there's only so much capacity in an economy, you'll eventually you'll run out of resources, is more or less the idea behind it. And this is kind of the opposite of that, I guess. Or it's one where it's like works on a grand scheme. But that's boring, that's not space, so I don't care, leave it, that's gay. And he's talking about they need to get more work, because they're building the big Mormon spaceship, but he says it's nearly done, it'll be out in 6 months, because it's basically completed. So they need to get the next big contract ready. And Holden says, well, you're going to need, if they're taking in refugees like these guys, they need the contract even sooner, they'll need the money. And Holden, Fred just laughs before Holden stops in the corridor in front of, obviously the space station. People will be like, what's the CEO doing? And he's like, no, you're dodging. The only thing of value I've got is this Martian warship, which apparently costs a couple $2 billion, their little frigate, the Rocinante. And he's like, I don't live in a universe where Daddy Warbucks swoops in and makes everything okay out of the goodness of his heart. So tell me, why you're helping us. Or we'll go be a pirate, which Amos likes the idea of. He says we'll be the scourge of the Martian merchant fleet, that's a pretty good sentence, that. And Fred is like, I'm not, nothing underhanded. You can carry guns for as long as you want. I don't care. Let's just get settled in before talking, because he doesn't want to do it in public. Holden doesn't move. And Fred kind of explains, Fred's like, look, I'll get you into the room, you don't have to unpack, I don't want to do it in public. So he takes them there, and there's these great suites. They've got these big apartment rooms, they've got a kitchen, a big dining room, things like that, which if you imagine the descriptions we've had of Miller's kind of place, where it's like a hole, it's like studio apartments that are absolutely tiny, they've now got absolute mansion blocks themselves. And Holden is kind of really defensive about it. He's like, well, my ship has a nicer coffee maker on the Rocinante. And then Frederick Johnson's kind of joking about the bedding arrangement, because there's some double beds, so who's going to have to sleep with Naomi, which Amos volunteers, and Naomi just kind of avoids. And Fred basically gets straight down to business, which is the reason I'm helping you out is because I want to avoid a war. And he says, ultimately when it comes to war, everyone's been playing very gentlemanly so far between the Belt and Mars, but the elephant in the room, which no one talks about, is anyone who doesn't live on a spaceship is structurally vulnerable. The stations and Mars cannot dodge missiles. All you do have to throw a rock at them. As Einstein was right, they'll be fighting the next war with rocks. And the belt, obviously because they live in an asteroid belt, has enough rocks to basically turn Mars into a molten sea. And he's like, right, I cannot do that. This is going to end up absolutely horrific for everybody involved. So we need to try and avoid it. And there's a third alternate. And people aren't going to kind of go, we can forget about it because the Donager and the Canterbury, so many people died, these big ships. So there's no war, there's no peace. And they're going to have to try and go for what Fred thinks is the third way, which is a criminal trial, which is really fucking boring. So you can kind of tell it doesn't happen that much. And there's also a weird pun where Fred says there's too much blood has been shed, and Holden then winces at shed being mentioned. Obviously, he was their medic who didn't do much and then died. Very weird writing that. It seems really forced, and it's like Holden wincing at the word being shed. And we kind of go through it, and Fred basically plays his card where it's like, you guys, my ace in the hole, the 4 people that were the only eyewitnesses to destruction of both ships. They saw the Canterbury go up and the Donager. So when the trial comes, he's going to use them, his card, and he get his seat on the big table. He'll use these guys and try and negotiate a better settlement for the belt. That's basically his plan. And Holden's like, fuck it, yeah, that makes sense. That's self-serving. I kind of believe him on this one. And he needs to keep us alive and looked after until that happens. Then we cut to karaoke. Naomi is singing karaoke and it's making Holden's head spin. She's up on stage, a microphone in one hand, a fuchsia martini in the other, and singing a song, a belt punk anthem by the Mouldy Filters is the band name, which is a very good name. And she finishes. Holden was like, that was absolutely fucking awful. And Naomi blows me a raspberry and says, that's the point. It's supposed to be awful. And Holden's like, okay, it was very good in that regard. And she's like, yeah, damn straight. And there's also quite a funny thing where she tries to drink a cocktail, but obviously she's got this really big fluffy hair that it falls over her face, and she has to hold it behind. She has to hold all her hair behind her head just to drink a cocktail. She drinks about 3 in a page and a half, it looks like. And then Alex is off playing darts because someone said Martians weren't good at darts. And then Amos has found the most expensive hooker he could, and has told them it's all on Fred's expense account because he's a legend. And another brothel reference or hooker. And Holden's like, maybe we should take a breather or mount a rescue mission or take a breather. And then Naomi gets incredibly pissed at him all of a sudden. Says, you take a breather. I've had 2 ships blown out from under me, a load of friends lost, and 3 weeks of dead time flying here. So no, getting another cocktail, and I'm going back in the karaoke. Holden then finishes to Scotch. He's been nursing for 2 hours because obviously he's sad and moody. We've got sad Holden. He's entered his sad arc. And he realises he's staring at Naomi as she goes up, realises he's been caught staring, and then leaves. Head out the door with only his ghosts, Arde, Captain McDowell, Gomez, Kelly, and Shed, to keep him company. Of course, all those minor characters have died so far just to get us only a third of the way through a book. Yeah, big kill count vibes. Then we get sad Holden. He's wondering about. He gets into bed in his big fancy suite, and the bed's amazing, but he can't sleep, and he starts walking. And he finds an electronics store and a tea house, but then the tea house turns out to be a brothel, and he wonders if Amos is in there. And he realises Tycho is a city, and he felt like a foreigner in it. He doesn't know what to do with him. And he ends up just walking around as like he just kind of people watching and whatnot. And he realises he's walked all the way to the docking area, and he gets back onto the Rocinante. It's only been 3 weeks, but he says it feels like home for him already, because we've got sad Holden, and he doesn't like the big Tycho apartment he has. And he's sad about Naomi being sexy with cocktails and not looking back at him, I guess. And he gets on the ship, and we had it, I think, a couple of chapters ago of Holden, where there's that big thing about him sitting there and feeling the vibrations of the ship. And he's sitting there and he's saying the ship is silent, he couldn't hear anything. There was a flexible docking station, so that doesn't even transmit vibrations, so the ship is completely still, with only a few flashing lights of the ship kind of sleeping away. And every time he closes his eyes, you can see Arde, who is his missus on the Canterbury, and you see Captain McDowell and various people, and he's really struggling to be alone. He's got PTSD, and he's a very sad little boy. And he's thinking about the Navy times he had, where people would be able to sleep like 2 meters away from a big game of poker, or people watching videos really loudly. And he starts realising maybe they preferred the noise so they wouldn't have to see their lost shipmates whenever they close their eyes. And he's already in a glum mood, and he keeps thinking, maybe Fred is right, and like a trial was a civilised thing that would actually work. But all he wants to see is that stealth ship and Alex's gun sights. He wanted them to have that same last gasp of fear he had heard through Arde's mic. For a time, he displaced the ghosts in his head with violent vengeance fantasies. When they stopped working, he floated down to the personnel deck, strapped into his cot, and tried to sleep. The Rocinante sang him a lullaby of air recyclers and silence. And then chapter ends. So yeah, it's a little sad one there. You kind of get that good dynamic there of Amos and Alex being able to cope in their own way. Like, they can go out there and they can find hookers, go to a bar, and they can deal with it a lot better. And Naomi struggles a bit with a lot of it. Like, she has to get drunk, and then she's kind of lashes out at him, and Holden is being all moody. And he leads them onto the ship, and then he has to go and kind of deal with his little fantasies. And that kind of that wants to be violent, but he's kind of also recognising that a trial, even though it is boring, and I wouldn't want to read about it, is the civilised way to go for it. So it's a good chapter, that. I enjoyed it. And it sets us up really good for Tycho Station about what's going to happen next, and introducing Fred, who's kind of stays around for quite a while. So yeah, cheers for that, boys. And I hope you have a lovely week.